We have literally 32 days left in 2022. It's hard to believe. The year, at least for me, began kind of slowly, without much disruption to what I would consider normal living. The months of January and February pressed into March, April, and May, and then something began to shift. Not sure exactly when. I've gone back to social media for a marker of some sort, as that seems to be where I note the most of what God has been doing or saying, at least to me. I see the timelines for the release of my first two books. Those were definitely markers on the roadmap of my past year. From February through August and even into September, two books released that I never thought would make it to print. It's actually kind of crazy to think about. And it seems with the release of those, something in my spirit released, even supernaturally as well. It was in July when God woke me from sleep and asked me if I would contend for revival. And in obedience I have, and since then continued to do so. And we are in revival as a nation and in the whole of the earth, not just in my contending, but in the contending of so many who have answered that same call. Then August came with a fiery word spoken over my life, followed by a course of events that I can't even begin to put in words. There's been flurries since of God pulling things from the past into the present because they are now necessary for what He's doing and where He's taking me. Things and people and experiences of 30 years plus have suddenly become important to the present and the future. And I can't even begin to understand it all, and I surely can't explain any of it. September, God birthed in my spirit a desire, a dream, a vision for the heartland of our nation. A center-cut revival of sorts is what I've called it. And I found myself dreaming again of things God promised me when He called me to ministry at 15. Deuteronomy 8, promises. Joshua 1:3, promises. These flurry of verses, floods of verses, promises. His calling is without repentance. Literally everything He called me to at 15, I'm seeing unfold now. Things I've waited 38 years for, they're springing forth. And then in September, God began to speak to me about starting a higher level training. I had no idea why or who or His purposes. I just gave Him my yes back then. And what seemed like suddenly, things began to shift. I preached for the first time in September in 7 years in my home church, and there was yet another shift. A week later, I jumped back in the baptismal tank, and with it came a fresh fire I'm still trying to comprehend. And I know without a doubt that I completely left living in safety and comfort that day in that baptismal tank. I came out of a cave. My yes became wherever and however, God, just as an absolute, resounding yes. Then God began bringing people into our lives, people who were choosing to join themselves to Jerry and I out of their obedience to God. I don't understand any of that, as I don't boast of knowing anything except Him. And I'll never say I've arrived, therefore, and as the people came, God spoke to me again of that higher level training. And so in my yes, I started it. October 11, 2022, we started All In, a prototype for things to come, higher level in that we are training on understanding our identity and our authority in Jesus, being clothed fully in Him and walking in the prophetic, whether seer or Nabi, knowing what the difference is, understanding what it is to have a word of knowledge and operate in it, operating in miracles, creative miracles, signs, wonders. We pattern to learn for 3 weeks over Zoom and in person go out and practice on the streets the 4th week. We have a generation of people who have no idea what spiritual gifts lie in their hands or what to do with it as it relates to the capital C church. It's like handing someone a power saw and telling them to go cut up that 2x4 across the garage, but if they've never done it or seen it done, how can we expect them to know how? We've done a great job as a church to train people to be pastors and teachers, but we've not taught them to be apostles, prophets, and evangelists. We've done better on the prophetic training in recent years, but how to deliver and cast out demons? We've got to ready a people for the harvest. So we've been going at this training for 7 weeks now. We're supposed to go out tonight, and God began to deal with me about all that He's done and said this year. And really, since He placed in my hands the prophetic art tools in January of 2019, He began to bring things back to my memory. I began to feel the weight of responsibility for the team He's entrusted to me, for the trust they've placed in us. I don't get it. I began to visit in my heart and mind the vision and dream of the heartland. He drew my attention to all the starts and stops over the years of contending for his promises in our nation. All the starts and stops of people going up and down the highway, of people setting aside time for prayer and fasting and ministry and evangelism and tenths of years past and knowing prophetic words for our nation's heartland, but then stopping. And I'm going to, I guess, meddle even a bit for a minute. I've attended conferences in the past couple of years. I've sat under tents. I've gone to events, if you will. I've heard it said time and again by those God has entrusted with a platform and a position that we have a responsibility to mentor, train, and take the next generation under our wings. I've heard it said to find the no-names, the mavericks, and to bring them up next to you. Ready them because the harvest is coming. I don't say this disrespectfully. I am completely understanding the time and energy and call and responsibility and schedule that goes into what God is asking us to do. What our yes really means. But the harvest is here. We are walking into the greatest harvest we have ever seen on the planet. Are we taking the no-names under our wings and saying, let's go? Are we saying, fly with me for a while? Are we still jockeying for roles, titles, positions, paychecks? I know we've got to pay the bills. I'm there. I get it. I mean, even I've been personally asking for mentoring because I know what God has called me to. I don't want to get an ounce of it wrong. I've reached out with letters, phone calls, emails. I've been ignored, walked past, looked at like I'm crazy for the asking, but I keep asking, I keep pressing, I keep on. I have to. When you have a fiery calling, you need an equal or greater fiery person to take you alongside and say, let's fly. So I continue to patiently wait on that promise. And God's showing me things in that. He's asked me, will you be faithful to steward those I bring you? And without doubt, my answer is yes. Without hesitation, I've promised to steward those he's entrusted to me. I still don't get why me, but I'll steward them well. And in our training as a team, God continues to train me. We should never stop learning, especially when it comes to God, his word, and people. I've promised to God to be faithful to the people he sends. Therefore, if something is not on track with the team, I ask God for direction, and we adjust course. We don't fly solo. We're a team. We fly together. In addition to that responsibility, God won't let me rest as it relates to the heartland of our nation. Keep saying it. He's brought forward prophecy after prophecy about the heartland of America over the past 20 years. There's been prayer offered up. There's been fasting. There's been people going. There's been stirrings. There's been retreats. There's been starts and stops. Lots of starts and stops. And as we transition into the last 32 days of the year, I've just heard God say, are you going to start and stop too? I was like, what? God, did you really just ask me that? And that's where this video is going today. For those of you who haven't seen what God has and is doing in our lives, I had to lay this foundation. As we round the 32 days of the year into December and then into 2023, I've heard God say, count the cost. I know without a doubt the last 2 days God has been asking me to count the cost. He's taking me back to Luke chapter 9, verses 57 through 62. In the Passion Translation, it says, on their way, someone came up to Jesus and said, I want to follow you wherever you go. And Jesus replied, yes, but remember this, even animals in the field have holes in the ground to sleep in, and birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay down his head. Jesus then turned to another and said, come be my disciple. He replied, someday I will, Lord, but allow me to first fulfill my duty as a good son and wait until my father passes away. Jesus told him, don't wait for your father's burial. Let those who are already dead wait for death. As for you, go and proclaim everything, everywhere. Go and proclaim everywhere that God's kingdom has arrived. And still another said to him, Lord, I want to follow you too, but first let me go home and say goodbye to my entire family. And Jesus responded, Why do you keep looking back to your past and have second thoughts about following me? If you turn back, you are not fit for God's kingdom. Why do you keep looking back to your past and have second thoughts about following me? If you turn back, you are not fit for God's kingdom. So I'm speaking here to myself, obviously, the team God has entrusted to me, and to really anyone who is willing to spend the time listening to this. Count the cost. You may have thought, I just wanted a little more training. I just wanted to understand the seer prophet gift or the Nabi prophet gift. I like the idea of operating in signs, wonders, and miracles. Wow, it sounds exciting. Healing the sick, raising the dead. Yes, God. Pick me, pick me. But there's a cost in the yes. Count it. Whatever your hand finds to do, do with all your might, as unto him. If God called you to work a 9 to 5 every day, that's awesome. Your 9 to 5 needs you and your yes in that. Some of you hearing this now, know God is calling you to something more than where you are. You feel it. You feel his tug, the burning in your chest, but it's not what you thought it would be at first. So you gave God your yes, but now you're like, is that what my yes meant? So you're now asking God if you can retract it. And he's probably saying you can. But you really, really, truly be in what he's called you to do. You really, truly be in his will if you retract it. And only you and he can answer that. Some listening to this are feeling the shift. The shift in quotes. You know what I mean when I say shift. You know there's new things coming, changes on the horizon, moves to another residence, another city, another state, maybe even another country. It may be that God has given you a timeline, and then you realize, wow, that timeline is closer than ever. In fact, you can't believe how close it really is. And in your excitement, you can't believe you get to do this, whatever this is. Some of you, you're married. Your spouse has now become an adjective. He or she is fiery. Your yes seems to pale in comparison to their yes. Somehow the yes of your spouse seems different than anything you expected. You're saying, I wasn't ready for this. I have no clue about these next steps they're talking about. Maybe when you and your spouse married, neither you or they were living for God. Maybe you were, but you weren't seeking him then like you are now. And as such, maybe you're thinking, I didn't sign up for this. So now what? Maybe you want to be as fiery as your spouse, but you aren't sure what that looks like. That's a tough spot to be in. There may be compromises that have to be made, a hybrid type of relationship or how you're going to pursue ministry. And I think the important thing is it's not forever. It's for a season, and it's for kingdom purposes. We've never been this way before, any of us. And what we expected life to look like by the time we reach December 2022 is not what it looks like now. Our expectations are shifting. They have to. Maybe you had some plans already in place and God is trying to upheave your plans. I've never been in this place before. I feel the responsibility of the prophetic evangelist like never before in my life. I've never been so sure of God's voice and call. Never. This is what I know. God is doing an absolute shift in positioning of his people. I was reminded in a phone call just this afternoon of a prophetic word about positioning. We must be in a position by the end of this year, 2022, or we will miscarry. We've got to be ready for 2023. Me, I can't afford to miscarry. I've been carrying this baby now since I was 15. 38 years. The vision must be birthed, and I will not survive if I go back to cave dwelling. Spiritually, I'll die. I cannot unsee all that God has showed me this year. I cannot unsee the prophetic words about the heart of our nation. I cannot unsee the signs of the times. I cannot unhear the words God has spoken to me about 2023, to others of what this next year holds. There's been a shift in our world. 2 volcanoes erupting in Hawaii at the same time. Come on. Other things we've seen taking place the last 2 to 3 years. Life is not as it once was. And I don't say this boastfully, I never will. I've not been wrong prophetically since January of 2019. I've not always been confident what I heard God speaking, but I've not been wrong. Every person God has sent me to speak to, it's been right and it's been on time. Every time I've heard him and responded and spoke and followed him, it's been accurate. The difference between 2019 and now is that he's established my confidence that I do hear him and that I haven't gone absolutely crazy. Others may think I have, but I know his voice. And now the difference even more is I'm counting the cost. Between now and January 1st of 2023, I'm readying my steps. I'm making sure of my footing. I'm laying hold of what he's called me to. I'm saying, God, I refuse to stop and start. I'm saying, God, I've put my hand to the plow. I've counted the cost. I won't look back.